Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and this time we are talking about that secret Nintendo Switch 2 feature that so many have been speculating on as of late. Thanks to all the different leaks we've seen of the Switch 2, it has been observed that there is an extra button below the home button on the right Joy-Con. It's in a square shape with the letter C on it. What might this button be for? Is there some sort of new feature of the Switch 2 that this button allows us to access? Is it something that was not possible on Switch 1? Many seem to think so. And so today, we are going to be theorizing on what exactly this button is going to do. But before going forward, let me take this moment to ask that if you do enjoy my content, to please subscribe and hit that notification bell, and if you're unsure, watch through this video and then consider subscribing and hitting that bell. So all the latest leaks have made it very clear that this extra button has the letter C. Once upon a time, a few months back, when the leaks weren't as clear, where we had some CAD image files, it wasn't as clear. There was some debate if maybe it might be more like a moon shape or something like that, but from everything we're seeing as of late, it looks like a clear-cut C, alliteration intended there. And so many people have begun to theorize on what this button might do. Something that has come to mind is this possibility of the C perhaps suggesting capture. Maybe like a recording button of some kind. Except here's the weird thing about that. This is a feature that we already have on Switch 1 thanks to the square recording button on the left Joy-Con. And from what we've seen, we already have that button on the Switch 2. There is a square button with a circular symbol just like Switch 1. And the square with the circle, that represents record. And with Switch 1, when you tap it, it captures the image that you see on screen. If you hold it for a few moments, it records the last 30 seconds. And to be honest, I thought this feature worked really well on Switch 1. I don't really think they need to go away from this. Now, maybe they want to give you more options in terms of recording, not just 30 seconds. I will say that all recording options are handled with one button on PlayStation 5. You press that button and you can either take a snapshot, or you can record the last 15, last 30, last 45 seconds, or even 5 minutes, 15 minutes, or more. Now, the Switch 2 likely, out of the box, won't have as much storage space as a PlayStation 5 because it is a handheld console. They will not be able to fit on as large of a solid-state drive. So I doubt there would be as many recording options on the Switch 2 as there is PlayStation 5, but perhaps they can still expand on what was available for Switch 1. That may very well be the case. I might even go as far as to predict that's going to be the case. But it could all still be handled by the very same button on the left Joy-Con, which we've already seen is there. So I don't really think that this new button on the right side is going to divvy up the options here. Like, maybe you could argue one button is just for snapshots and another button is to record footage, but we only need one button to do both, so I just don't really think that's the direction they're going to go in. So then, what might the C be suggesting if it's not capture? Well, something else that I think is at least worth mentioning is that we have seen C button controls on prior Nintendo consoles. The Nintendo 64 had 4 different C buttons, the Nintendo GameCube had a C stick, but this C button for Switch 2 I think is going to have a very different role here. Those buttons were directly for gameplay interactions. This button I think will be a bit different. Looking at how it's just below the home button and how it's in the exact same shape and style as both the home button and recording buttons, I don't think this is going to be something that's meant for direct gameplay, but rather something that's more operational, having more so to do with accessing console-wide features. In other words, like the record and home buttons, these are buttons that you'll be able to use across the board regardless of what game or app you're using. Now, of course, there are some random exceptions with the record button because they don't want you to record certain moments and things like that, but hopefully you get my point here. Whatever the C button is, it's something that in general we're going to be able to use across the board, and it's not going to be something that varies depending on the game, usually. So what else might the C button stand for here? Well, a theory that's gaining a lot of ground as of late is cast. Some people think it might be a casting feature. You press the button and it casts whatever you're playing on your Switch 2 to the TV screen. And some have even suggested that this idea might extend to dual screen gameplay. Perhaps you could be playing in handheld mode with the Joy-Cons attached, you press the C button, and it casts the image over to the TV screen, but also there's still elements you can access on the handheld screen. In other words, you could have dual screen gameplay. I've seen people talk about this idea for some time, and more recently it's gained more attention because of the C button, and I'm not going to rule it out entirely. However, I do have a hard time believing that this would be a big primary feature of the console. Let's first talk about it from the dual screen perspective first, and then we'll speak a bit more on the other options of casting. Nintendo has done dual screen gameplay before. They've done it with the Nintendo DS, the Nintendo 3DS, and the Wii U. They have 3 different consoles that had dual screen gameplay. And so there is a large library of games out there that you can't really just play without significant changes on the Switch or the Switch 2. And so it might benefit Nintendo to somehow enable dual screen gameplay so they can really expand their options in terms of the Nintendo Switch Online library. And so a feature like this might work for those kinds of games, and honestly, I could see them maybe pulling something like this off. There might be just enough hardware in the dock to receive a Bluetooth or some kind of wireless signal from the Switch 2 to cast over and play games in this way. But there are reasons I'm skeptical of this. We've already seen some different games from these dual screen consoles remastered for Switch, and I expect that there will be more remastered in the future. There is a lot of money to be made in this way, as opposed to just bringing all these games over to Nintendo Switch Online, especially when we haven't seen other platforms that came out before these dual screen consoles, like the Nintendo GameCube, and perhaps some third-party platforms as well, like the Sega Dreamcast. And let me go a step further, considering how well Microsoft is working with Nintendo now and how they're acting very third-party, I wouldn't be surprised if Xbox, the original, could also be an NSO option down the road. Point being, I don't think we're necessarily that close to seeing DS, 3DS, or Wii U be added to Switch Online before other platforms like this. Although, considering the simplicity of DS games, maybe we could see those added on to Nintendo Switch Online through a feature like this. It's conceivable. But some people might think this would be a great way to introduce dual screen gameplay to modern Nintendo games, and I don't think this would work. And this has to do with the way the Switch and, in theory, also the Switch 2 will work. These are handheld consoles, and power consumption has to be taken into account here. The battery life can only go so long, so they limit clock speeds, that way they don't drain that much of the battery, and also so they keep heat at a reasonable level. This is how it works in handheld mode. And so the visual and performance abilities of the console in handheld mode are limited. But when docked, when connected to an external power supply, power consumption in terms of the battery life is no longer a concern. And they can then afford to clock up the console a bit more, output better visuals and performance for a bigger screen. And that's the way the Switch 1 has worked, and I expect the Switch 2 to work in perhaps to a more significant degree. And so for this reason, the idea of using a cast feature to cast the image on the handheld screen to the main screen as a primary way to play games with dual screen gameplay, I just don't think they're going to do. Could they in theory do it? Sure. But in terms of it being a primary feature for most games, I don't really feel like it's something that Nintendo would even think is worth really investing into, to be honest. So I'm personally very skeptical of this option, but at the same time, I do love the idea of having the ability to play dual screen games when we're talking about playing a lot of older Nintendo games on the console. But what about just being able to play in handheld mode and having the option to cast what you're playing or watching on screen to the television? This might be a neat little thing you can do. Say you're hanging out with your family in the living room, and everyone's watching something on the television, but you're playing a game on your Switch 2, and something really cool happens, and you're like, hey, let me show you guys what's going on here, and so you just press the button, as opposed to getting up and sliding the Switch 2 into the dock. Maybe you could do that. But as I explain that, when you can just get up and do it, is it really worth going through the lengths of adding a whole other button to do something like this? Maybe, but I'm personally kinda skeptical. So if the C button isn't for capture, if the C button isn't for cast, what else could it stand for? Well, we are operating on the assumption that this is definitely a C, as what we've seen from the leaks, and this letter is meant to represent some kind of word that will reflect the feature of what this button can do. But I'm just mentioning this because it's possible that maybe it's not that. Maybe it's something else kinda different. But there is something that occurs to me that makes sense in terms of what I expect of the Switch 2, that could also be a console-wide feature, and would also make sense as to why they're all of a sudden adding it now. So with one of the recent accessory leaks we've seen of the Switch 2, there is this hole here that many are theorizing could be for a microphone on the console. And if there's a microphone on the console, then maybe this might be there because there's going to be more of a dedicated effort in having voice chat on the Switch 2 for online games. And what's interesting about this idea is that we've seen other reasons to think that maybe this might be the case. We already saw that Nintendo did an online stress test with that MMO game that they were trying their very best to keep a secret, and we also know Nintendo has overhauled their servers throughout the Switch generation, so we have seen literal evidence that Nintendo is trying to ramp up things when it comes to their overall online play. But then on top of that, it is rumored, we talked about this yesterday, and also it's been discussed by different insiders over the last couple years, that there's going to be a great deal more AAA third-party support for the console. And you see, what's so interesting about this is that if that's going to be the case, if the Switch 2 is going to be powerful enough to run a lot of AAA third-party games in a reasonable way, there's going to be this opportunity for Nintendo to garner this audience that typically would play on PlayStation or Xbox. And I'm talking about the kind of mainstream audience that mostly just plays your FIFAs, your 2Ks, your Call of Duties, the games that are available usually on most platforms, where there's a certain standard of online chatting options. And so maybe this time around, Nintendo is finally going to adopt a little bit more of what their competitors have been doing for years, where they'll have a more standardized set of online features that are console-wide, not relegated to a mobile phone app that no one wants to use, and that doesn't work well. So basically what I'm getting at here is that maybe the C button stands for chat. It's a chat button. You press the chat button and options come up. Maybe you can send a voice message or a text message with your friends on your Switch, and perhaps it goes beyond just a game-by-game basis, but it's a console-wide feature, so you don't even necessarily have to be playing a game. You'll be able to open up a party chat with different players on your Switch 2, and everyone can be playing different games or watching different apps, but will have the option to all speak in the same party. There could be a few different options here, and this would work very similar to how it works on other platforms, except it would be something finally available on a Nintendo console. I can see Nintendo going in this direction, and I recognize that some people are going to disagree because it's not something Nintendo has done before, but over time, Nintendo will pick up certain things that work well and are standardized, and this is one of them. And I would argue we've already seen them slowly moving in this direction. They've just taken a longer time to do so. So that is my personal theory on what the C button might be for, but at the end of the day, it is a theory. I do not know what it actually is. But what do you think? Is this C button related to anything we discussed in today's video, or are there other possibilities that you have in mind? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.